The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. By the time we stepped out of St. Matthews, the Charleston sky felt soaked into my bones. Arthur Rowan wasn't just my grandfather, he was the steady voice in a life filled with sharp words and colder silences. The service was quiet, dignified, crowded with faces from the community he had poured so much of himself into. My father, Malcolm, stood at the center like a man running for office, firm handshakes, polite smiles. For a moment, I almost believed grief had softened him. That illusion didn't last. By evening, the mourners had gone, the air was heavy with the sweet, cloying scent of damp flowers when I found myself in the estate's drawing room, nursing lukewarm coffee. I stared at the oak mantel where Arthur used to lean while spinning stories just for me. Malcolm entered without ceremony. The mask he'd worn all day was gone. "It's done," he said flatly, "the estate transfer, $400 million, locked in my name." He spoke as casually as if he were announcing tomorrow's forecast, then allowed himself a thin smirk. I nodded, unsure what response he expected. He didn't wait. "You're useless now." The words hung in the air, absurd enough to seem unreal. "Excuse me? You've coasted long enough." His tone sliced cleanly. "Pack your things, I want you out by morning." For a heartbeat, I couldn't feel my hands. This was my father, the man who once steadied the back of my bicycle, looking at me as if I were disposable. I forced myself upright, spine straightening even as my chest constricted. "Fine." My voice didn't waver, I wouldn't give him that. I walked away, my footsteps echoing down the long hall toward the bedroom that had never really felt like mine. Silence had always been Malcolm's favorite weapon. His rules were precise and suffocating: no slammed doors, no talking back, and never, ever, challenge him. My earliest memories of him were measured in corrections: posture too slouched, tone too sharp, ambitions too unrealistic. Victories weren't celebrated, just dissected. An A was never enough, a trophy never quite counted, praise was rare, and when it came, it felt like an afterthought. Arthur was different. He was sunlight where Malcolm was shadow. He asked me what I wanted, and he actually listened. When I told him at 15 that I wanted to work in finance, Malcolm scoffed. "A man's world," he'd said. Arthur only smiled and told me to learn everything I could. Years later, when I was accepted into a competitive graduate program, Malcolm called it a waste of time. That night, I sat on the porch with Arthur, the acceptance letter limp in my hands. He slid an envelope across the table, a cashier's check, enough for my first year's tuition. "Don't tell him," Arthur said softly. "This is between us. Consider it an investment in someone worth investing in." That was who Arthur was: quiet faith, costly and real. Now, in my childhood bedroom with a half-packed suitcase, I thought of that night. Malcolm could strip me of this house, but he couldn't erase the foundation Arthur had laid beneath me. I reached for another hanger when something inside my old bookshelf shifted. Since the funeral, the estate had grown colder, sharper. Doors once left open were now locked: the library, the sunroom, even Arthur's study. The staff avoided my eyes, their loyalty redirected. Margaret, who once slipped me scones, gave only stiff nods now, murmuring Mr. Rowan's instructions before hurrying away. At dinner, Malcolm spoke of moving forward, renovations, investments, streamlining the household. His words carried the satisfaction of cutting away dead weight. Back in my room, I skimmed my fingers along familiar spines of books. One, a thick biography Arthur had given me on my 18th birthday, slid forward. Inside, tucked between the last pages, was a sealed envelope with my name written in Arthur's careful hand. I sat on the edge of my bed, tearing the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, the ink faint but deliberate. "The will protects those who protect others." No explanation, no context, just that line, heavy enough to stop me cold. Arthur hadn't left it for Malcolm, he'd left it for me. Malcolm's study still smelled of cigar smoke and polished leather, though the warmth was gone. He sat behind Arthur's mahogany desk, bourbon glass at his elbow, leaning back in the chair as if it had always been his. "Sit," he ordered without looking up. I didn't move. He finally raised his eyes, a smirk tugging at his mouth. "I suppose you've heard," he said smoothly. $400 million, all mine." Arthur was generous. His voice held no grief, only the smug triumph of a man who thought he'd beaten the system. "You've had a long, comfortable stay here, Callista," he went on, tone cooling with each word. "But you're not a child anymore. You're a financial burden. You've been coasting." He delivered it like a verdict. I almost laughed. I'd worked since 16, paid for most of grad school with Arthur's help, not his. But arguing with Malcolm was like shouting at a storm. "I want you out by morning," he said, leaning forward, elbows on the desk. "This is my house now. I decide who belongs." His eyes lingered on me, waiting for the crack, the flinch, the desperate protest. Instead, I felt the weight of Arthur's note against my leg. "The will protects those who protect others." I straightened. "Fine." No tremor. No hesitation. I left without looking back. By nightfall, my suitcase sat by the door, packed into the worn leather case Arthur once gave me. The envelope stayed in my coat pocket, a quiet ember of strength. When the grandfather clock struck 9, I stepped into the cool Charleston night and didn't turn around. By the next afternoon, I was climbing the narrow stairs of a brick walk-up downtown. The apartment was small enough to touch both walls if I stretched, but it was mine. No locked doors. No watching eyes. I pawned a few of Malcolm's gifts. Jewelry meant more for display than love. It covered my deposit and first month's rent. My analyst job paid enough to keep me afloat. At night, though, I kept pulling Arthur's envelope from my coat pocket, rereading the line again and again, "The will protects those who protect others." It wasn't casual. It wasn't meant for Malcolm. So I started digging: probate filings, trust clauses, even obscure estate cases. Buried in the noise were hints: wills that activated only under conditions, funds tied to civic projects, trusts designed to test rather than reward. Arthur had always been deliberate. His will would be no different. 3 days later, my phone lit with an unfamiliar number. I nearly let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. "Callista Rowan." A crisp, measured voice. "This is Evelyn Cole. I was your grandfather's attorney." A pause, deliberate. "We should talk. His will is unusual." My pulse kicked. "How unusual?" A low chuckle. "Let's just say your father's week is about to get complicated. Can you come in tomorrow?" Her office was stripped of pretense, neat lines, muted tones, walls of labeled files. She gestured me into a chair, then folded her hands. "I've been expecting you," she said. "Arthur anticipated certain dynamics in your family." "Meaning my father." "Meaning exactly your father." She slid a thick binder across the desk. "Arthur placed the entire estate into a trust. Malcolm cannot touch a cent of the 400 million unless specific conditions are met." I leaned forward, pulse quickening. "What conditions?" "You and Malcolm must co-lead a community redevelopment project, approved by the city, and meeting Arthur's philanthropic standards. Equal authority. Equal signatures." I blinked. "You're saying he can't do it without me?" "Correct." Her tone sharpened. "And there's more. For 12 months, there can be no lawsuits between you, no public estrangement, and no withdrawals from the partnership. Break any rule, and the trust dissolves. Half goes to Arthur's charities. The other half, to you." The room seemed to hum. I thought of Malcolm in Arthur's chair, bourbon in hand, declaring victory. "Calling me useless." "Arthur really planned this," I murmured. Evelyn's eyes softened. "He wanted the person he trusted most to protect his legacy. And that person wasn't your father. When does Malcolm find out?" Her lips curved faintly. "He already has." Less than 24 hours later, there was a sharp knock at my apartment door. When I opened it, Malcolm stood there. The expensive suit, the polished shoes, they were the same. But the cracks were showing, sweat at his hairline, color drained from his face. "Callista," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thought we should talk." Family to family. I stepped aside without a word. Malcolm entered my cramped living room and scanned the second-hand furniture like it was an insult aimed at him. "The bank tells me there's been a misunderstanding," he said, lowering himself onto the sofa. "Funds are tied up in some kind of trust, bureaucratic nonsense." His tone was light, but the strain beneath it was obvious. "It's not a misunderstanding," I replied, "it's the will." He waved a hand, dismissive. "Your grandfather was sentimental, we can work around it." His voice softened. "You and I, Callista, blood is blood, we've had our differences, but we can put them aside now. Make this work, for both of us. Arthur's words flickered through my mind. Don't react. Negotiate. What exactly are you proposing? That you sign whatever's needed so I can move forward. You'll get something, of course. I held his gaze. That's not how it's written. His smile thinned. Callista, I'm offering you an easy way through this. You think you can manage a multi-million-dollar project? Without me, you'll drown us both. The threat was clear, but I didn't flinch. If you want the money, I said evenly, you'll follow the terms, all of them. His jaw flexed. For a moment, I thought he might explode. Instead, he rose and straightened his jacket. Think about it, he said, and walked out without another glance. I closed the door, already knowing I wouldn't need to. He'd be back. 2 days later, he was, this time in Evelyn Cole's conference room, facing an agreement she and I had crafted clause by clause. Malcolm would publicly acknowledge me as co-executive, he'd cover my living costs during the project, and he'd transfer 3 estate properties outright, no conditions, no reversals. When I slid the document across the table, his eyes flicked over the pages, then up to me. You can't be serious. Every word. His arms folded. This is extortion. The will is extortion, I countered. I'm just giving you a path forward. For a week he stalled, scribbling red ink across margins, parading in a sharp-suited lawyer who lasted 1 meeting before confirming the truth. Arthur's wording was ironclad. Without me, the 400 million was untouchable. When Malcolm finally returned, he was quieter, not broken, but waited. He picked up the pen, signed each page with clipped strokes, and shoved the packet back across the table. I hope you know what you're doing, Callista. I do. We rose. He left without shaking my hand. The door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time, I felt the balance shift, not just in law, but in power. And it was only the beginning. The waterfront lot was a cracked stretch of asphalt when we began. Arthur's vision was for glass walls opening to the harbor, classrooms for training, and weekend markets for the community. From week 1, I lived in the details, walking the site with contractors each morning, reviewing invoices at night, lobbying city officials for signatures. The crews began turning to me for answers, not him. Malcolm hated it. He arrived late to meetings, pitched shortcuts that gutted Arthur's design. When I refused, he muttered about me being impossible, but the will kept him from cutting me out. The press loved the narrative. Rowan family unites to honor patriarch's dream. Side by side, we looked like a team. Behind those photographs, every exchange was a fight in disguise. By month 11, the center's steel frame gleamed against the harbor. On the balcony, Malcolm stood beside me, watching the crews set the last supports. You've handled yourself better than I expected, he admitted. Better than you wanted, I said. His humorless laugh was brief. Maybe. It wasn't trust, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. At the ribbon cutting, the courtyard overflowed. Reporters, city leaders, neighborhood families, all gathered under a bright spring sun. The new community center gleamed behind us. Malcolm stood to my left, smiling for the cameras, but the speeches were mine. That had been Arthur's stipulation, and mine. I spoke of Arthur's belief that wealth meant nothing if it didn't lift others. I thanked the contractors, volunteers, the community. I didn't mention Malcolm. The applause rose steady and strong, warm enough to drown him out. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his jaw tighten as the attention stayed fixed on me. By sundown, the conditions were fulfilled. Malcolm had his fortune. I had something else, 3 prime properties in my name, and the public credit for delivering Arthur's dream. As the crowd dispersed, I slipped down a side path, heels striking new brick. The center thrummed with life behind me, voices, laughter, possibility. Arthur's legacy was alive, and for the first time, I carried it without apology. I didn't look back at Malcolm. I didn't need to.